hopefully that whet your appetite for attending in a future year. Admittedly, California is a little far next year, but I think the rumor is that the following year will be Florida, and you can get pretty cheap flights on Allegiant and things like that from Cincinnati down to Miami and Fort Lauderdale. So maybe a year from now, 2 years from now, you could go. Back to our study on marriage, which we are, I don't know, what is this, lesson 4 or 5, Ethan? Somewhere in there? You don't know? You don't number these? Oh, I do. I have them numbered somewhere, but I don't remember what we're at. We're somewhere around 5. And this is the responsibilities of a husband. I'm not trying to pick on husbands first, as if you need it more than the wives, but we all need it equally. And so I'm referencing quite a bit, by the way, the book by RBNet individual member Jim Neuheiser, Marriage, Divorce, and Remarriage. Really excellent work. I've not read the entire thing, but everything that I've read from it, which is probably most of it, has been excellent. So he said in here, a few years ago, he received a phone call from a friend who desperately needed to speak with him, and he was in tears, and he said, my wife is thinking of leaving me for another man. And he was broken, but instead of being angry, as I probably would be, he said, I'm broken. I know that I have failed to love my wife as I ought, and I haven't been a good spiritual leader. This is my fault too, not only hers. If I had been a better husband, maybe this would have never happened. I want to learn how to be a godly husband. Can you teach me? And sure enough, through Jim's help and his own repentance, and the Lord's help, of course, the Lord repented of the sins in his marriage, and he tried to win back his wife, and in the end, his wife was won back. And he said this story demonstrates the power that a husband's Christ-like love can have to transform, meaning change, his wife and her life. What passage do we tend to focus on when it comes to the husband's role in marriage? Ephesians 5, so flip there if you would. Someone read verse 25 and 26. Read it out loud if you would. Who's got it?
Husbands, love your wives as Christ loved the church and gave himself up for her, that he might sanctify her, having cleansed her by the washing of water with the word.
The best thing that a man can do for his wife is to not study his wife, but to study Christ's sacrificial love for him. Then he can love his wife and learn to love her according to how is best suited to her. So we're going to look at some ways in which that passage and other passages teach us to love our wives as husbands. How many of you would say, men who are married, that you fell in love with your wife? I think I did. How many of you would say you grew to love your wife? It's not a bad thing, by the way. Well, that's true. Yes, also true. Yeah. But you, of course, know that sometimes that falling in love concept can be abused. Well, it's love. I fell into love. It's like I didn't mean to. It just happened, and therefore I can fall in love with someone else. But this idea of love as a feeling or as something that happens to you, or even as sexual passion, is not love. It is simply dependent upon the other person. For instance, I fell in love because she shows me attention. I fell in love because she has sex with me. I fell in love because she's so good at blank. In other words, I love you because of what you do for me. And that's not actual biblical love. Some of you might remember a few years ago when David Vaughn sent out a missionary update. He's the one in France, if you recall. And he said that he was talking with a man who honestly believed that his current wife he would, in the coming years, divorce, and he would marry a younger, more attractive wife. And then when she got too old, then he would divorce her and marry a younger wife. And he couldn't even hardly believe what he was hearing. I mean, for one, the arrogance to think that not one, not two, but 3 different women would marry you because you're so attractive or whatever. There's that, but then there's also the fact that the morality of it is just sickening. He wasn't in it to love because that person is precious in God's sight and marriage is a good gift and marriage reflects the reality of Christ. He was in it because she did something for him. Now most men wouldn't admit that, at least here in America, that if my wife's appearance fades or her performance as a wife fades, then I'm just going to love her less. But that's what you kind of see, don't you, by effect. People divorce when their kids get out of the house because we served a functional purpose together, and she was the maternal side of the parenting that I couldn't provide as a man. And now that the kids are out of the house, our love has waned, and I guess we don't love each other anymore. Let's just quit. Someone read 1 John 4, 10 and 11 for us, please. 1 John 4, 10 and 11, a passage we looked at not too long ago as a sermon text.
Love consists in this, not that we love God, but that he loved us and sent his Son to be the atoning sacrifice for our sins.
And 11?
Dear friends, if God loved us in this way, we also must love one another.
Or the verse that I'm sure you're familiar with, the famous one from Romans 5. God demonstrates his own love for us in that while we were still sinners, Christ died for us. It's not a passive, it's not receiving the love, receiving the respect, and that's why I love you. It is an active love based upon who God is. God, in other words, through the gospel, treats us as if we have perfectly kept God's law, which we haven't, because of what Jesus has done. So therefore, a husband, if he understands the gospel rightly, should do what? If the gospel is to treat us who have not been perfect as if we are perfect, what should men do for their husbands? What kind of love should we show to our wives? Unconditional love. Wes, has your wife ever let you down?
You might laugh. I can't think of a reason.
Wow. Wow. All right. Brownie points for you tonight.
Good answer. Good answer.
All wives let their husbands down. All husbands let their wives down, of course. But we treat each other not according to how they have treated us. You stupid woman, you let me down. What's your problem? Step it up. Come on. This wife thing isn't that hard. When we act like that or say things like that, we betray our gospel allegiance. Therefore, the husband should imitate Christ by taking the initiative in his marriage. For instance, husbands, don't let your wife be the one who has to initiate reconciliation when things are heated between you, when you aren't getting along. Let you be the one who initiates that reconciliation. Christ-like love, in other words, is not just a feeling, although if you feel in love with your wife, great. Enjoy that. Relish it. Treasure it. I hope you feel in love with your wife for decades. That being said, the feeling doesn't commit you to your wife. The commitment enables that feeling. It is for the good of the other person. You love them for their good, not how good you feel as if they should receive your love. For instance, at the cross, well, I should say at the garden, on the way to the cross, Jesus admits that if this is not your will, let some other way. In other words, he didn't feel like going to the cross, but he went anyway because of his great love for the Father and for us, his people. There are a few things that a woman wants more from her marriage than to know that she is loved and cherished. And we can love and cherish our wives, men, by knowing that we are loved and cherished by God through Christ. As 1 John 4:19 says, we love because he first loved us. Any questions on unconditional love before I go into the next way to love our wives? That one's easier in the sense that, in theory, yeah, I'll love my wife unconditionally. A little harder to do, but that's easy in theory. This next one is perhaps the most disagreed upon, even in our circles. And it is to love her sacrificially, meaning to serve her and not to lord over her. Maybe you've known someone, or maybe you yourself have been this way, men, where you have seen yourself as the boss over your wife. So without betraying confidence or pointing fingers or telling personal stories, tell some examples somewhere that you have seen of people misusing this concept of leadership in the marriage and have instead bossed around the wife. What are some examples you can think of? Servant leadership is weak. People say that? Okay, what do they mean by that?
They see servant leadership as you're just kind of like a doormat, whatever your wife wants. Like,
okay, honey, sure.
I'm going to sacrifice. Only do what you want. It's fine.
Yep. Okay, what other misuses and abuses have you heard about male leadership in marriage? Allie?
Well, because I'm the leader of the house, I can be hands off with the kids. I don't have to change diapers. I don't have to take care of them. That's your role.
Yeah, okay. You do the dirty work. I do the big picture stuff. Okay? What else have you heard or seen?
It's only the woman's job to do the dishes or
Yeah.
whatever, similar to her, what she said.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I'm not going to do the dishes. Come on. It's a woman's thing. The kitchen is a woman's area. I don't cook. Never mind the fact that men have been chefs for centuries and bakers, yeah. Yeah. Anybody else? Have you seen this? Is this pretty common? How about this? If this is really common, if you've seen the abuses of domineering male leadership, put a thumb, no, let's see, do it the other way. Thumbs down, and then I've seen this a lot. And then middle is like, I've seen it sometimes, or you're like, what? All my male leadership that I've seen has been really good. Where are you on the thumb scale? Okay. It really varies. That's interesting. I'm glad I asked that question. I think it tends to pendulum swing. Based on our nature or our nurture, one of the two, we men tend to be we trend toward one or the other. I will just air my own self here that I trend toward the domineering side. And I think that would be, Megan, would you agree? Okay. She agrees. This is what I tend toward. So I have to watch my own propensities and not domineer over my wife. I am not the boss. Now, granted, it does say, if you want to go back to Ephesians 5, that wives are to submit to the Lord. So there is a leadership aspect to it. But when you play the authority card too often or too much or in wrong circumstances, you are not loving her sacrificially, but domineering over her, and thus you betray that you actually understand what it meant for Christ to lead the church, to be the head of the church. It says it in there somewhere, right? Yep. Verse 23, Christ is the head of the church. Well, the head of the church did not mean for him sending someone else to be the Savior, the sacrificial Savior. It meant he himself went. He also says here that a husband should give up himself, his life, for his wife, by implication. Husbands, love your wife just as, or in the same way as Christ loved the church and gave himself up for her. I mean, let's be honest, guys. If you're in a dark alley and a man jumps out with a gun, you should jump ahead of your wife. And sure, that is exactly what it's talking about here. Or your wife is tied to the railroad tracks, like Jim says in the book. Or for some reason she's in mortal danger and you have to save her life. Yes, do the manly thing and step in front of the bullet. Pull her off the railroad tracks, even if it means laying down your own life in the process. But most of the time, that's not going to be what it refers to. What is sacrificial leadership going to look like, first and foremost? Allie?
Deferring to your wife when appropriate.
Okay, deferring to her when appropriate, knowing what she's strong at, which you would value her input on, yeah. Being in communication with your wife. Someone else?
Not being esteemed.
Esteemed. Okay, what do you mean by that?
Not having the praise or like doing it so that people see you as someone special or good or whatever, but knowing that it's the right thing to do and that you may be reviled for it or that
Okay.
there may be consequences or punishment or anything like that.
So in other words, doing it for the sake of her and not for the sake of you. Okay. It can look like you getting up in the middle of the night, dads, with the little kids. It can look like, yes, and I'll be hammered for this on social media if this gets out, doing the dishes. It may look like you sitting down and actually playing with your kids and not expecting your wife to do it or the kids to play by themselves. And this is an example, not my example. Giving up a Saturday golf game to assist with a project around the house. Any golfers in here? That might apply to you. Some of you might know the name Robertson McQuilkin. He was the president of Columbia Bible College, now known as Columbia International University in South Carolina, a Christian college. And he resigned from his position as president to care for his wife, who had Alzheimer's. And they lived like a mile from the school. And even though she had a caretaker, she would like sneak out the bathroom window and like walk to find him at the seminary because like that was the only thing that brought him comfort. And finally got to the point where he just said, I have to stay home and I have to care for my wife. And he said that it was a matter of integrity. It took no great calculation. I had promised 42 years before in sickness and in health till death do us part, and it was time to do my part. When a man commits to marriage, vows to his wife, he's promising to do what Philippians 2 talks about, to have this Christ-like attitude, which means serving. So yes, the man is the head of the marriage, but God gives authority for the purpose of service. Someone read John 13:3 and 4, please. John 13:3 and 4.
Jesus, knowing that the Father had handed all things over to him, and that he had come forth from God, and he was going back to God, got up from supper, and laid his outer garments aside, and he took a towel and tied it around himself.
You know what I would do? Whew, God gave me all things. Great. Hey, Peter, would you go over there and lay aside your garments and wash everyone's feet for me, please? That'd be great. Thanks. But that's not what he did. He himself did it. Even as he considered his own position as the Son, the eternal Son, and as the God-man, he still decided to humbly serve. That famous verse in Mark. The Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve and to give his life a ransom for many. In other words, a husband who is constantly exercising dominion in his marriage, constantly expecting that everything be done according to his wishes, is actually being selfish. He's choosing to have everything in this house be under his direct command. But that's not what God has in store for leaders in general, and especially as a man who leads his wife. If you constantly have to dictate to your wives, men, how the money is spent, what TV shows are watched, what books the wife can read, is allowed to read, you could be distorting what is an accurate picture of Christ's love. Instead, a husband who understands what Christ has done will properly use his time, money, energy, leadership to make sure that his wife is well cared for. Now, next time we're going to talk about a purifying love. So don't take this lesson by itself without taking my next lesson in context. But for now, know that it's not about you, husbands, and what you find to be most easy or convenient for you. It won't just be a matter of 50-50 in the marriage. Well, you do your part, and I do my part. Now, there's an extent to which you kind of have to delegate duties, and you have to figure out who's going to do what in marriage, of course. But at the same time, you shouldn't be saying, well, that's not my duty. I don't do that. If my wife asks me to cook, I'm not good at cooking, but I try. And sometimes I fail really miserably, and my poor wife has mercy on me. But I'm not like, psh, the kitchen's your place, woman. By the way, never call your wife woman unless you're talking in jest. Not a good way to earn her respect and love. But you say, wife, what do you think? Or is there something I can help you with? When I was in seminary, one of my pastors, who's also my choir director, I took them out for lunch, and I wanted to learn from them about marriage, and we were newlyweds. And he said, Dustin, what's the first thing you should say when you get home? And I said, I love you. He's like, nope. And I said, and I came up with a couple other answers. He's like, no. He's like, you say, how can I help? And I was like, oh, yeah, that makes sense. You're not there to tell her what to do. You're there to lead in a way that is sacrificial. Questions on this? This one's a little bit more controversial than the unconditional one, the sacrificial section. Anybody disagree? There are labels we could put on these different things. You all probably know what the labels are, but labels aren't always helpful because sometimes you can have really bad examples of one label and really good examples of another when usually it's just the opposite. So I will refrain from giving labels, but let's be unconditional and sacrificial in our love, brothers. What you got, Chris?
I like to make everybody laugh. Wouldn't that be a good idea? Have you ever heard of